Good, okay. All right, well, Rachel will let people in as she sees them, and I'll go ahead and get the session started because we have an awesome presentation lined up today. So welcome to today's presentation presented by West Virginia University Career Services Center. My name is Allie Royce and I'm the Multimedia Specialist at Career Services. Please remember to keep your microphones muted during the session and send any questions through the chat feature. Today we'll be discussing mastering your next virtual interview. We have Charrae Rogers, the Recruitment Specialist at Sherwin Williams, and two other members of the Career Services team with us today, Jessica DiLello, Career Development Specialist, and Rachael Conrad, Assistant Director of Employer Relations at Career Services. So we'll go ahead and let Charrae start us off with a little bit about her and some virtual interviewing tips.
Yes, thank you so much, Allie, for introducing me. I'm so excited to be in front of you guys today. So we'll talk about mastering your next virtual interview. So first, so you can learn a little bit about me. Here is a little bit about myself. So I started out as a coordinator at Lincoln Financial Group. This picture below with the sign from the escape room is the first 11 people I ever hired in life. And I was 19 and they all were about 23, and it was fun because I planned for them to go to like a open bar situation and I was not allowed to participate. So it was a good time. 2016, I graduated from Villanova with a degree in interpersonal communication, kind of more HR focused. Then after working still, I got a role at Amazon as a HR journalist. They call it a senior HR assistant at a distribution center in San Antonio, Texas. So essentially I was the night person. So I ran the distribution center at night. So from 3 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. I was the HR person running the show, dealing with all the situations and, you know, things like that. So you could probably see me, I'm smiling, but I'm probably stressed in this picture. 2017, I transitioned to do more back to recruiting, to do more engineering and technology recruiting on a university level with a company called TE Connectivity. They make a lot of sensors and connectors, like on your washer dryer, your Fitbit, your iPhone, a lot of things there. And then 2019, I started with Sherwin, and I am the recruitment specialist hiring for our management trainee program, and I support Delaware, West Virginia, regular Virginia, DC, and Maryland. And these kids right here are not mine. They are my nieces and nephews. I'm a diehard auntie. I go to dance class and gymnastics and all kinds of events. And then my little fun question for you guys to get to know me more. The youngest one here, his name is Gary, and he belongs to my sister. Gary is kind of an old man name, but we went with it. So I like people to guess how many pounds he weighs, and then I'll spoil it for you guys. So he just turned 1 and he weighs 30 pounds. This is my sister overfeeding him. So as you can see, he has a chicken wing in his hand. He's going hard on that. And we have some milk here where he's taking that to the head. So that is a little bit about me. And I'll hop in to say a little bit about Sherwin. So, you know, Sherwin Williams, we're a large company, Fortune 500 company. Our revenues in 2019, we netted over $17.9 billion. We have over 60,000 employees, and we're essentially everywhere, most places. Some places where we have stores right across the street from each other. So you can choose, you want to go left or right, you know, you're going to be at a Sherwin Williams store. So what our customer base looks like is mostly twofold. So it's either homeowners that want to paint their living room, their, you know, bathroom and things like that. And then on the other side, we have contractors, professional painters, and different things like that. So kind of more business to business sales. And that's what kind of generates our revenue. So this is the program that I recruit for. I just wanted to share some details as we're still actively recruiting for here. So it's, you know, a training program. You usually start upon graduation. It's full-time with a lot of incentives and benefits. You get, it's very structured. You have training on the job. You'll do some classroom training. You'll have a workbook that you worked with. And it's mostly that training in the sales, the business to business, which we're about. You'll learn how to manage the business from all aspects. That's hiring employees, doing, the budgeting for the store and handling HR issues, doing the own marketing for your store. And usually, this program is really a springboard for anything within Sherwin. I mean, our business is paint, and once you kind of know our products and how our business really works, you can really transition to anywhere. For example, one of my coworkers actually started out as a part-timer in one of the stores, and now he's an HR manager supporting DC, Maryland, and Virginia. So it's a lot of that. So that's why you can kind of see we have 96% of promotion from within. So once you kind of understand the paint world, you're in it. So this is the big woo. So COVID-19, everything has changed, especially with our interview process and what that looks like. Gratefully that we are considered an essential business. So we have been able to stay open during these times. But, while there's some uncertainty, sometimes the state is open, then it's closed, and we're learning new things about COVID as well. It's a lot of opportunity ahead. So our company has been doing very well with, making new policies that benefits our employees, making sure our customers are safe and things like that. It's really important to us because we support a lot of local businesses. Essentially, our business helps put other people's food on other people's tables. So we've been very knowledgeable about keeping our business open and, adjusting during these times. And kind of how that affected the interview process. So usually our process is threefold. So first you phone screen with me, so nothing much changed there. And then usually you would go to a store visit because we like to be very transparent in our process to say, what does that look like? What does this look like? Because a lot of people, when they think this is a management trainee role, but we support a lot of blue collar. So it has a mixture of white collar and blue collar. So kind of showing them that environment, what that looks like is very important to us. So, we have at one point we had to close our sales floor and just do curbside pickup. So we had to kind of pause on store visits and stuff like that. But how as some things have progressed where we have been able to open up our store in a social distance, fashion. So we're allowing people to come in and do store visits again, obviously with your mask on and things like that. And then our final interview, we have went pretty virtual, where you meet with the final hiring manager. Usually we have a system called Teams, and you connect virtually with them, and then a decision is made. So our process, while, it's a lot of uncertainty, we kind of have planned for those changes and kind of made a system that will be able to, change over time as we learn more about COVID and how that affects our business. So kind of hopping into the topic at hand. So it's generally two types of virtual interviews. So it's either a two-way virtual interview. So that's where I'm looking at you, you're looking at me. We know we're having a discussion. And then some companies, especially larger companies, have moved to pre-recorded interview. And what that looks like, similar to this picture here. So they'll ask you a question. You will not see another person. And then you press record, and then you go ahead and answer the question. That one's a little tough just because they give you a little bit time to practice, but usually companies have a maximum on how many times you can re-record. So let's say you have 3 tries. So you want to make sure that, you're hitting it correctly, the first few times so you don't lose your chance for that. So we're going to talk more about interviews as we kind of get into the roundtable portion of today. But I wanted to also share with you guys a little bit about how to do well in an interview. So that requires some pre-work. So what that kind of looks like, a lot of times during any interview, they are asking behavioral-based interview questions. And how do you know you're in a behavioral-based interview? It usually starts with tell me about a time, describe for me, different things like that. So you want to answer those based in the STAR format. This may have been very similar to what you probably heard in career services and things like that. So, that first thing is situation. So what's going on? The task is, what are you dealing with? What did you Like, what is the situation, expanding on the situation, the task at hand that needs to be completed. Then you want to go into action. So what did you do? A lot of times this is where people kind of fail, because a lot of times some of the things are group efforts, and they're talking about, well, we did, but usually in an interview, the interviewer wants to know about you. So what part did you play in that? And then to end that story, you want to talk about the results of it. So did you save the company money as a result of your actions? Did everything go well? Did you resolve an issue? So it kind of just closes the story. So you want to make sure that you're using this format. It's very similar to a lot of questions you'll answer as well to use, and it'll be helpful. So I just wanted to go through some questions that I feel like students think are super tough to hear about during an interview, and they usually don't know how to answer them. So the dreaded, tell me about yourself. So what we are not looking for, do not tell me your life story. A lot of times I get some, candidates that are like, well, I was born in Michigan next to the river. I don't want to know where you were born. You don't have to tell me about that. It's more, we want to keep it professional. So tell me, about your professional style, and basically, what are you looking for in this position, things like that. So your answer should be a quick rundown of your qualifications and experience, and essentially, why did you select to, interview for this position? And you don't have to go in a chronological order, like you don't have to tell everything, but you can focus on your strengths, and especially tell those experiences that you have a good, star story for, that pertain to the role, and you can obviously share those examples. So I wanted to provide you guys with a little template of how to answer this question in a good fashion. So first, you'll start with an overview of where you are now, so your current role, even if that's being a student. So you kind of say, I do whatever you do currently. And then you want to get into, how you got to where you are. So you can talk about your education, some of your past experience. So for example, I was sharing, basically, I didn't know much about HR. I worked at a pizza shop as a work study job, and then it was getting hot in there, so I wanted to go into an office job, and I found out it was a work study in the HR department. And then I started working there and kind of learned about HR, and really dedicated to learning about the different policies and processes. And then you also want to talk about a goal for the future. So what is something that you hope to learn for this role? Just to kind of put it out, like, especially in the role that I recruit for as a management role. So a lot of times people want to gain that leadership ability to be either in higher management with our company, or even learn how to manage their own business. So it kind of round out why you are interested in this position. So this is a great template to use to answer that tell me about yourself question. The next question I have for you guys are, where do you see yourself in 5 years? This is very daunting, especially you're like, I don't even know what I'm gonna do tomorrow, especially in these COVID times. I'm like, do I wanna wear sweatpants or leggings today? Because you don't even know. During this question, you wanna be realistic. A lot of times I get like students like, I'm gonna be the CEO in 5 years. And you're like, it took the CEO about 25 years to get there. So you want to make sure that you're being realistic in that fashion. Obviously do research on career path. So what does it generally look like? And that's a question you can kind of ask the interviewer too. So, once people have been in this role, where do they usually land in about 5 years? So you want to see kind of what the career path is. And then let your employer know that you're looking for a long-term career for the organization. Most companies want to hire people that want to work for them. So you want to make sure that, it's a position that you like, and also that you're kind of showing the company that you have a long-term investment in learning skills and developing there. So that will kind of help you answer this question. I like Honey Boo Boo, so I had to put this meme here because she's super cool. Awesome. And heading into the next question is, what makes you the ideal candidate? So during this question, you definitely want to research the company and see how your skills match up with the qualifications. So that means look at the job description. So check out the job description, see the different things that they required, either required or preferred, and see how you match up to that. But however, you don't want to compare yourself to others. So you want to keep a positive tone, because sometimes that can leave a bad taste in an interviewer's mouth. So some people say like, I'm going to be the best person person that you ever met. I know the most about management. You know, a lot of people overestimate there. So you don't want to make sure that you're not downing other people while you're lifting up your skills. So you want to keep a positive tone in the interview. And you want to describe your hard and soft skills that will add value. So it's a lot of times, yes, you may have certain skills, but if it's not relevant to the job, it's very hard. So for example, I do the management trainee where you're managing people, you're doing hands-on things. And some people say, well, I'm very good at, administrative filing. In this role, you're not going to do much filing, so that won't necessarily be a skill that will help you in this position. So you want to make sure that you're describing the skills, but you want to make sure they're relevant to this position. And kind of my last question for you guys is the salary. And I feel like that is a question that everyone struggles with. Sometimes I struggle with it as well. So a lot of times when we ask this, you want to, if you can avoid it, don't give an exact number, because that will kind of put you in a box. Let's say most jobs have a range of how much they're willing to pay someone for a role. So let's say if you say, you know, the range is maybe 45,000 to 50,000, and you're saying, I want 43,000. They'll be like, okay, we'll do 43,000, but the range was way higher. So you want to kind of give a range kind of based on research that you conducted, especially in that particular role. And also be mindful that salaries are different based on your city. So if you're from a smaller city, it'll be less. If you're in a larger metro district, it may be more. And obviously you want to reiterate your commitment to the job, not just that you're in it for the money and things like that, but in the other things that the job can benefit. So kind of a good rule for thumb here is you want to keep the lower end of your range at least 10% above your current salary, or any number that you determine is a reasonable salary for the position. And then you want to be sure that the bottom range is the lowest amount that you're willing to accept. A lot of times people want to be polite during this time, so they'll try to go with, you know, numbers that are super low. But what if you receive that? Then you're not going to be happy with that position. You're not going to want to stay there. So you want to make sure that you're being realistic, but you have to do your research to do that. So I believe that was my last question. So I'll hand it back over to Allie.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. So with all of that information, we're going to go back to the beginning and start with how a student should prepare for a virtual interview. So I'll let, Charrae, you can go ahead and start that one, and then we'll go around.
Yeah, so definitely how to prepare. So I think what is really important and first is you need to test your tech. So a lot of times, you know, you need to make sure your lights are working, you know, your internet is working, obviously your camera and things like that, and find different ways. So some people do it on their phones, some people have it connected to their laptops, and that comes with different things. So you want to make sure that you are testing your tech there, and also making sure your location is distraction free, but I know that's super hard since we're all working from home. So a lot of recruiters, at least, we're very mindful of that, and we're very flexible in that way. So if your kid pops in and says hello, that's not a deal breaker. If your dog wants to say hello, hey, we love dogs too. So just be mindful of that as well. So that's what I would say.
So I think that's really good advice. I think that this is probably something that I could talk a lot about. So how do you prepare? I think this is probably where a lot of your energy should go before an interview, whether it's virtual or a real in-person, if it's non-COVID times. You know, you need to put a lot of your time before your interview. So I can probably talk about this for a really long time, so bear with me. I'm going to try to keep it short, but I can probably break this down into 3 main categories. And if you take anything away from this today, I hope it's these 3 main thoughts. So I'm going to break it down, and I'm going to break it down into the 3 main categories, and then further, I'll break it down even further from those categories, okay? So the first one is tech. I couldn't agree with you more, Charrae. Definitely the tech. So I agree with that. And so the first one is tech, content, and then your professional dress and appearance.
Yes.
So tech, I'm going to start with that one. So definitely tech. And when you're preparing with your tech, I think also with that comes logistics. The first thing you should do is check the time zone. So, you know, if you're doing a virtual interview, a lot of times these recruiters might be in a different time zone than you. So consider, you know, consider where they're coming from. If it's, their headquarters might be in a different location in the United States. So my little sister is a recruiter in the DC area, but she hires for Seattle, she hires for Arizona, all these different places. So make sure where they're coming from. Make sure you do some research about the company, that you know where they're coming from, and make sure that you're reading where the time zone is, because she always puts her interview time as Eastern Standard Time. And sometimes people don't show up at the right time because they're just considering that the time zone is their time. So I'm just going to put that little disclaimer out there, because that always is her pet peeve. Sometimes they don't show up to her interview time because they think it's in their time zone. And she always makes it very clear, and she will even sometimes explicitly state it. And that's just like a rookie mistake right there. You could just completely miss out on an opportunity. So time zone, check the time zone. Seems pretty obvious, but make sure to check on that. So for logistically, check the time zone. Another thing with tech, couldn't agree more with the things that you had just said. But with that, you also might want to, you know, if it's through Zoom, check your Zoom name. I'm looking through the people here. You guys all look very professional, no problems there. But I've seen some people pop onto webinars and they've got like weird like nicknames and things like that. Like sometimes that does happen. And I've seen people pop on interviews and mock interviews with students, and they have weird virtual backgrounds. Just stay away from that kind of stuff. And also consider the background that you have set up. Make sure that it's clutter-free. Make sure that it's plain. Because when you're meeting with a recruiter, or whoever your audience might be, the hiring manager, whoever it might be, just make sure that it's focusing on you. You want the content, you want the interview to be focusing on what you're answering, and right there in that moment with that person across from you, not the things behind you. Sometimes people I've seen try to stage it with like a picture, or, you know, fancy things, or, you know, have some cool things to try to, you know, set them up. And that's not really authentic, right? You just want it to be on the interview. So those are some tips of advice for that. You want to practice with a friend, practice with career services, test your audio. Things like that, test your connection. Sometimes your broadband will come out. So I would test it at the same time of day, the same day of the week. Do a whole dress rehearsal like you would if it was a real performance. So test it out. You never know if the audio, weird things might happen. So that's something with the tech, the camera angle, you know, you want it to be eye to eye. I've seen some weird angles. Charrae, I see you nodding your head. I've seen some weird angles where it's like really strange. So I can't say more about that. You might want to prop it up on some books, some things like that. Lighting, you want to have natural light if you can. Make sure that you're well lit. And record yourself. So I said practice, but also record yourself when you're practicing with a friend or something like that, so that you can listen back. You can listen to your answers. You can listen to how it sounds. You can listen to if you have fillers when you're practicing. So that way you can really hear yourself too. So that's what I would say. So that's my first thing. Again, I'm sorry, I'm long-winded on this, but when I say logistics and tech, those are my things for that one. So that's the first part. So my 3 parts, logistic and tech, those are mine for that part. My second one is content. This is probably where you need to spend most of your time. So with the content, I would say you need to prepare so much time and so much energy with your content. What I mean by that is you need to research the company. You need to know it forward and back. So what do you do for that? Charrae, what would you recommend for researching the company? I know you want to go on the website. Do you have any other ideas for researching the company?
Oh, so many. Okay, so here we go. Hopefully I don't get long-winded. But definitely researching the company. You know, obviously a good place to start is that website, but it's a lot of places where you can kind of review companies. So a lot of people use like Glassdoor or look on Indeed reviews, but while it's a helpful thing to look at, also be mindful that a lot of people reviews may have had a skewed experience or definitely one-off situations. So don't base your whole decision on that. but you can kind of research, especially on Glassdoor, kind of what are the interview questions, what do they usually look for, what are the ranges for this position, and things like that. And also, a lot of companies on their website have like a newsroom, so it kind of shows like what have they done in the past, and what, you know, are new things happening, so you can kind of learn about the company. And obviously LinkedIn, like LinkedIn is a big resource. Follow the company on LinkedIn, look at what they post, and see that. And you can definitely, while all recruiters are pretty mindful of like LinkedIn, it's really cool when someone brings that back up.
Okay, good ideas. And also their social media. So they might have social media on Instagram, Facebook, other possible websites as well. Perfect. So you want to know all those that you can prepare questions for them, and talk. Not only that, I have a lot of times students will have a lot of knowledge about it, but sometimes they forget in the interview to show that, which is so sad because they have all this knowledge, and I will get to talking to them and I'll say, have you researched anything about the company? And they'll say, oh yeah. And I'll say, well, why didn't you say that in your mock interview? You need to really show that through your answers. You need to show that through your questions. You know all this about the company. Why aren't you demonstrating that? So you need to really show that you know all about them back and forth. So you need to really research the company. Beyond that, so this is still with my content, my second tip.
Well, Jessica, can I expound on one of your points a little bit? So I say, while you're doing research for the company as well, know who you're interviewing with. So a lot of times people try to stump the recruiter. So they're like, oh, so tell me about the last 10 fiscal years of Sherwin Williams. And you're like, I started last year. So I may not know all that information. So definitely do your research, but don't try to stump your interviewer with information. But that's all. I just wanted to add that tidbit.
Yeah, that's painful. Yeah, that's not good. So also with that, when you're also preparing, I had another thought that you also want to prepare your questions, right? So you want to know the STAR technique, and you want to prepare for traditional interview questions like your strengths, your weakness, tell me about yourselves. A lot of the ones that your presentation showed, I love those. So you want to be able to answer those, but don't just have standard answers, right? You want to prepare them to what the job description is, right? So I always tell students, I always coach them to have the job description, know it like the back of your hand, and also prepare for each bullet. I'm getting a little bit extra here, but I think it's a great idea if when you're preparing, if for each bullet, you can have experiences from your history to reflect that. So be ready to talk about them to match each bullet. That takes a lot of work and a lot of preparation. And sometimes you can't match each one. Sure, that's a little much. But if you can, really think through it and have very tailored experiences. And, you know, for the tell me about yourself, you can probably come up with a time you went through a conflict with a coworker, a time that you experienced, I don't know, your proudest accomplishment, something that you did well, something, you know, have stories like that reflect the job description. So if you have things that reflect all these bullets and things from your experiences, have them ready to go, okay? So that's how you can prepare. So that's the content. So that's my second topic. The third one is dress, okay? So I've got logistics and tech, content, and then dress is my third one. That one's really short, right? Wear a suit. Wear a suit. That's pretty easy. Even for a virtual interview, I would recommend for you to wear a suit and wear the full suit, wear the shoes. And here's why. I have heard some crazy stories where they've said, can you please stand up? Can you show me your shoes? Now that's a pretty extreme, right? But even more than that, I don't know if that will really happen to you, but even more than that, it's a psychological thing, right? I know I perform better when I'm fully dressed, when I feel good. And the great thing about a virtual interview is I can put on perfume. I could wear some cologne. In a real interview, I can't douse myself with perfume, but it makes me feel good. It makes me feel more confident. So that's something that might help you out. So those are my three things. Shala says it happened to people she knows. So, you know, things like that. Those are my three biggest tips for you to prepare.
And I just, as you're talking, Jessica, I'm just like, oh yeah, I got some things too. So I just wanted to say too, when you're talking about the background, I said I did a virtual interview and a student had a Tiger King in the background, and all I could think about was Carol Baskins and not the candidate. So, you want to make sure that you're not being distracting there. And I think also too is like body language, monitoring your body language. So sometimes people do things when they're like a little nervous or told to do that. A lot of girls are like, no, you know, do this. Or my favorite one, I did an interview and one guy with all his points, he'll go like I was thinking karate chop, like I don't know, like a lot of things was happening. So those can be very distracting to focus on you as a candidate. So you want to make sure that you're monitoring your body language. And I'll decrease now.
Yeah, so those are my top 3: logistics, tech, content, and dress.
Awesome.
Those are all really great, ladies. The only small thing I wanted to throw in there is practice, but don't memorize. Because if you are memorizing your information, you are no doubt going to mess it up. So be comfortable with what you're going to say. Be comfortable with what you're going to wear. I mean, you can call career services and we can get you a practice interview set up. Just don't memorize your lines.
Yeah, that's great feedback from all 3 of you. That the Tiger King really left a lasting impression in my mind too. So the next question we have is, what are common misconceptions about virtual interviews? And Charrae, we'll let you start that one off as well.
So it's kind of one main one that a lot of people say. It's just that, and I think that's why a lot of recruiters are kind of iffy to use them. So a lot of companies think that you lose your personal touch if you do a virtual interview. But a lot of times you're still, especially if it's in a two-way virtual interview where I'm looking at you, you're looking at me, we're still having a conversation, we're still connecting and things like that. And honestly, you kind of find out more about a person because like Jessica was alluding to, you're in your comfort zone. So I'm kind of getting to really know you in your comfort zone instead of bring you out. That's when you kind of shine your best, when you're not in your comfort zone. So those are, I think, that is a big misconception that it doesn't have that personal touch when you're still having a conversation between 2 people and you can, get to know them personally. And obviously people are more at ease during that time.
Yeah, I agree. I actually got my first full-time job through a virtual interview. It was in 2012 and it was over Skype. So it worked out for me. I had done 5 interviews prior in person and I got the job, my first full-time job, over a Skype interview. So I think there's something to be said for that. So I can definitely attest to that. I'm a good example of that. So I would say a big misconception, I think sometimes people think it's easier, sometimes too, or maybe they're more comfortable with it. I don't know, I think it can go either way. I think sometimes people might think that they can click on the website or that they can, bring things up sometimes. And I think sometimes that is also noticeable. So I think, recruiters can see if you're clicking around and they can hear it. So be mindful of that. I would definitely say that. So that's probably something I would point out.
Okay, and next up, are there benefits to the job applicants of having a virtual interview instead of an in-person one? And you did touch on some of that, but if you want to elaborate more.
No, I think just too, the scheduling ease, and that's ease for both on the candidate and the interviewer. So a lot of times, it's hard for my schedule to match with your schedule, especially if you work 9 to 5. I work 9 to 5 too. So if you can't talk to me during that time, it's really hard to connect. So it kind of has some scheduling ease because essentially a lot of times, especially if it's pre-recorded, you can do the interview when you want to, and we kind of get that, and you can kind of replay it and things like that. So I think those are some of the benefits, and especially a lot of people, if you're not able to come in person, usually they're either a virtual interview or a phone interview. So in the virtual interview, obviously you're learning way more about the candidate than if you just did phone, because I think that's where more people try to do kind of what Jessica was alluding to. They're clicking through the website, they're researching really quickly, they already have it written down, rehearsed, so you're kind of missing out, so you kind of get to see people in their natural element. So I think that's kind of a great benefit.
Yeah, I think there are definite benefits. I think to the student, sorry, I've got something up here. I think there are definite benefits to the student as well. One of them being that you're on your home turf. This is your home field, right? You can have a lot of comfortable elements. I mentioned the perfume or the cologne, but there could be even more to that too. To being on your home field. You might have something to comfort you too, like, I don't know, something in your pocket or something that you wouldn't normally have on an interview. Beyond that, you don't have the stress of being in an unknown environment. You don't have the stress of having to find a new place to navigate, going somewhere the day of. You don't have the stress of, sometimes awkward interactions. So that might mean like how to practice a handshake, especially in COVID, right? But you don't have like a lot of kind of strange interactions. So I think that you eliminate a lot of stress barriers the day of, especially, just being one-on-one, especially if you're an introvert like myself. Sometimes it can be a little bit more comfortable being through a screen. Now, of course, there are some benefits, some downsides, of course, because it's virtual, it's through a screen. But I think you definitely can connect and you can make the most of it still. You absolutely can. And you're just going to have to go the extra mile to make those connections and to reach out and to make sure to connect and keep up with people over a screen, I think. So yeah, you don't have to commute, you're not driving, you're not finding parking, you're not having to maybe travel. Maybe there's expenses saved on both ends. So I think there are a lot of benefits to this. And downside I didn't mention is maybe you're not seeing the actual physical workplace, is something I didn't mention earlier, I want to loop back to. So hopefully you can find a way around that. Because, I think when you're deciding on a place that you want to work, that is an important thing that maybe you want to know about before you're deciding to work in a place, right? And if you're feeling out people, of course, from an interview, you're not going to know from just an artificial, it's kind of superficial from an interview. You can't really feel everything out about them. But sometimes being in a physical location, you can see what the workplace looks like and see if this is, a great place or what the facilities look like. Sometimes that does help. But, so sometimes not seeing it is kind of a leap of faith, but who are we kidding? A lot of us are working remote now anyway, right? So that is something to consider. But that might be something that you have to take into account for your questions, right? So, I think that's something that you might want to ask about. So, I don't know what this workplace looks like. Is there something, where are the facilities like? What kind of place would I be working in? Will I be provided a computer? Well, I don't know. Those might be just questions that you need to kind of feel out. You have to be very tactful when you ask them, of course. Charrae, would you be offended if you were, talking to a possible candidate and they ask questions like this?
No, I think those are the questions that you want. I think a lot of times, like I said, that's why in our Sherwin Williams process, we actually send people to the store so they can see what the environment looks like. So job fit is very important, and company culture is the most important thing. Because if you dread going to your job every day, are you going to be operating at 100% like you would if you loved your job? So I think those are good questions, and especially during this COVID time, I feel like you're going to get more of those questions. I feel like students should ask more of those questions to kind of get it what it looks like. So will I be working on a team? Do I work more individually? Do I have an office or do I have a cubicle? Like, what does that kind of look like in your environment? So I think those are great questions to ask. And usually those are the fun ones because I love to talk about company culture.
Cool. So yeah, things like that. So I circled back to cons, but yeah. I think that there are a lot of benefits to, interviewing over virtual, being in your home base, a comfortable environment, all those kinds of things I think are a definite plus.
So I might go a little out of order. We do have some questions that have come in. Joshua asked us the weirdest question or most unexpected question you've gotten or heard from students during an interview, and how did you or those students respond? So I know COVID, I don't know if that's specific to COVID, but that might bring about its own set of weird questions. I don't know.
That is a tricky one. So can you restate it? I'm sorry, you said one of the weirdest questions I received?
This is Josh Cooper speaking. So this is actually something I was reminded of, an experience I had at an informational interview at a company in DC, and they asked me, describe your perfect day. And I had no idea how to answer that. And I first started out with work, and he said, work cannot be a part of your perfect day. And I'm like, oh, okay, you're right. So I had to think a little bit deeper. So, sometimes there are those unexpected questions that you might get that you wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So how can people respond to those types of questions, and how can they prepare for those?
Yeah, so actually that is like a whole thing. So a lot of times it's called asking creative questions. A lot of times they'll ask you those, and usually the answer doesn't matter as much as the thought process matters. So for example, when I interviewed for Amazon, they said, what kind of tree would you like to be if you could be a tree? I'm like, I don't like outside, so I don't know, only a couple trees. So it kind of matters kind of how you think and how you process the question, less about the answer. But a lot of times I feel like people think, at least recruiters think, those questions kind of put you at ease because you're like problem solving and thinking creatively. But sometimes it can be a little off-putting. But don't stress too much on the answer, because usually it's a mixed bag. When you ask a question, you know you're going to get a mixed bag of like trees and what kind of dog, what kind of animal, what's your spirit animal, all those type of things. So I wouldn't definitely stress over that answer, but just answer the best that you can and be really authentic. I think that's what matters the most. So when I had to answer that question, I was like, I'll tell you a tree, but I don't really I never been camping. I don't go outside often. So they kind of know, you kind of get some laugh there. So I would say, just, I feel like there's no real way to prepare for those questions, but just really try to think about what's the underlying questions, the problem solving they're trying to get at with creative questions.
Right. And, to build off of that, like I've heard questions like, what kind of cookie would you be? Why'd you pick that cookie? Or, animal, or, all sorts of different kinds of off the wall type of things. And I think really what they're trying to get at is, who are you as a person? Or, or think maybe sometimes they do have a purpose to why they're asking that. Maybe they're trying to see like the cultural fit, like, do you fit in with our office or personality? Or, a lot of times they're trying to look at, like what motivates you, or what type of person are you? A lot of times they're just trying to see, who are you authentically? I love that, Charrae, you brought up, who are you authentically? I think a lot of times, and I'm kind of like jumping ahead here, be authentic in your interview. I think that is what's going to come through more than anything. A lot of times people will answer how they think the interviewer wants to hear. Or, I have this prescribed formula this is how I should answer this. But really, who are you as a person? What motivates you? And, how are you going to fit in this workplace? And like, who are you truly? And, the reason you should really answer that as truly and authentically as you are as a person, really, are you going to be a good fit for this job? Because if you answer, what you think they should want to hear, and maybe you do, and maybe they hire you, but maybe you're going to do terrible at that workplace. Maybe you're going to get fired in a month, or maybe you're going to just be miserable working there. Answer truly authentically how you really are as a person, because it's going to be a better fit for you and for the company. So I can't speak enough about, really answering authentically.
Yes, it's really hard to keep a facade up for a long time. If you plan to work there for a few years, if you said that you like one thing and they're going to be like, oh, okay, let's say you said you like dogs and you don't like dogs, and who knows, maybe the office becomes dog friendly and now you hate going there every day, so you want to make sure that you're being authentic.
Right. Or like you answer very bubbly and like, I'm an extrovert and this is who I am. And they think they're getting this person who's going to be like a very extroverted, bubbly, outgoing person, and that's just not who you are. How are you going to keep that up?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Joshua asked another question that I think you two could touch on is, how important are informational interviews when you're looking for a job? Are they worth it?
I would say they are, and it definitely expanding. Networking is very important, and I feel like that's a part of networking informational interviews, and especially during this time where I feel like getting a job is kind of uncertain, so you can kind of figure out more pointed to what kind of position do you want. So most of the time, obviously, people are in school and they're like, I can do this, I can do that. So you need to find out, maybe research on LinkedIn or build your network to figure out like companies that you potentially want to work for, what do you potentially want to do, and do those informational interviews to kind of see what's the day in and day out of that job. Like for example, sometimes, so I alluded in our company, we have management and we have, sales in the program that I recruit for. So management, you're kind of home based, you're meeting people, you're building relationships. As a sales rep in our company, you're on the road probably about 90% of the time. You really have no office. So you kind of get to learn how that job looks like. And, as a sales rep too, like your biggest client, that's maybe your $1 million client, they can call you at 9 a.m. and you have to answer because they're your $1 million client. So you kind of get to figure out what that job really looks like from the inside. So the inside scoop, like I like to call it.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. I'm so glad that you brought that up. And for any of you watching who might not be familiar with informational interviewing, that's where you basically, you meet up with someone, or I guess virtually you would talk with them. And that's where you ask them for an informational interview. That's where you speak with someone to learn more about what they do. Basically, you're going to ask them questions about what they do for more information, not necessarily to seek for a job. It's more to learn more about what they do. Is more for an informational interview. So I think that is a really good idea while you're job hunting, to nurture your network, to build your network. I think it's also really great at any stage. I would do that before your job hunting, truly, is really where it's really important, so that maybe they might be able to connect you when you are job hunting too. It's great for if you're still exploring jobs. It's great for, they might be able to connect you later as well. So yeah, I think that is good for your job hunt at that stage too. They might be able to connect you. They might be able to help you find a job. I think it's great at any stage to meet up with them and to still foster with them. You might have met up with them before. You might still continue to meet with them. I think it's great at any stage to continue informational interviews.
Sure.
So we're really putting you on the spot. We have another question in the chat that came through. Should a student write their answers and have them on the screen in front of them?
That is a good question.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that kind of goes on kind of what Rachael was saying a little bit about, you don't want to over rehearse and memorize too much. So I think sometimes it can be good. A lot of times, especially even in face-to-face interviews, people jot down little notes to remember little things about that, and that is fine. But I don't think you should just read off the screen and say, hello, my name is, and go and keep going there. So you want to make sure maybe you can have like little bullet notes, but also I think what is very important that we touched about, kind of setting the scene, preparing for the interview, you want to maintain eye contact. So you want to make sure that, yeah, you can kind of look over, like glance over, but make sure you're looking at your interviewer as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that was brought up. I do happen to have a couple notes for myself. So yeah, I do coach students. You can definitely have some notes. That is a bonus. I'm glad I forgot to mention that myself. That is a bonus to a possible virtual interviewing versus a real interview. You could definitely have your resume in front of you. I do recommend to students to have a notepad and a pen to take notes, and to let the recruiter know that you're taking notes, so it doesn't seem like you're off, not paying attention. Say, oh, I've got a notepad, I'd like to take some notes. Let them know, cue them that you're taking some notes, so it doesn't seem like you're not paying attention to them as they're talking. So it's really important that you're tactful about it. I can't say that enough. You have to be tactful. So for some people it might work, for some people it really might not. So that's really the whole thing about this. So for some people it might work, some people it might not. But yeah, you could have a couple bullets. I would not recommend full out notes. I would recommend maybe a couple bullets here and there. Your resume would be great to reference. That's probably what I would recommend. Your resume to kind of, if you're one of those people who goes blank, like I'm one of those people who when I get nervous, I kind of blank out. That's me. So So yeah, it could be nice to kind of reference and have a notepad with some paper to take notes. I think that would be appropriate, but you have to practice to make sure you're doing it right. And I agree. The most important thing is to be present with that person across from you. And when I say present, what I mean is you're not looking at yourself, you're looking at the camera, okay? So you're making eye contact with the camera. So you want to be present, you want to be engaging in the conversation in two-way, and you're not in your notes, you're not in your resume, you want to be having that two-way conversation.
So, Charrae, a question too, as an interviewer, would you rather see someone taking more notes or being an active listener? What is more important?
So I enjoy both. A lot of times, especially if we're doing a face-to-face and you pull out some notes to take notes, I'm like, wow, they are very serious about this role. They want to know. And then a lot of times if they are taking notes, they're asking clarifying questions as well to say like, oh, so what did you say about this? And then, so I think that kind of goes there. But obviously I feel like both, you should be taking notes and then being an active listener as well into what the position is. Because usually when you talk to me, at least as the first interviewer, what we're looking at, basic qualifications of the job. Do you fit that? Do you fit the company culture and stuff like that? So I want to make sure that I'm able to answer your questions as much as you're able to answer my questions as well. And that requires active listening.
Yeah, these are wonderful questions.
Yes.
Yeah, these are really good questions. I'm loving what's coming in. I agree. I definitely agree. I think that you want to seem very active and you want to seem engaged. I think something important to point out too is the type of role and probably like your fit too. I think that it probably also depends on what you're interviewing for and also what type. If you're going into sales or management, you probably want to seem very assertive and very, any role you want to be engaged in and very assertive. I take that back, but I totally take that back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. No, but it does vary in different roles, like especially when I was doing recruiting for technology type stuff. Some of those questions are more on the technical nature. So, you don't always have to, obviously, taking notes will not help you as much as, being an active listener to hear, what types of engineering languages do you know and stuff like that. So I feel like in some positions it is more that, but a lot of all jobs mostly are like I call it customer facing, where you're interacting with other people. So that's really important to kind of focus in and things like that.
Either way, I would recommend that you practice.
Yeah,
I know that I'm probably a little biased here as a career development specialist. It's my role to help students prepare, but I would recommend you to practice not only like with your friends or peers or, a mentor, but come practice with a professional at Career Services so that we can make sure that before the real thing, you're doing it right. So when I say like you're looking in the camera, that you're doing things the right way, that your content is right, those three things I mentioned earlier, I would really make sure that you're doing it right before the real thing.
So I don't see any more questions at the moment in the chat. So we will go ahead, because we're approaching that hour mark. We will end the presentation with a piece of advice to leave students with to really ace their interview.
Yeah, so kind of what has been the theme of today, practice. So obviously practice makes perfect. Sometimes you'll do the interview and you'll fumble and you'll know you fumbled and you're like, okay, when you got the next virtual interview, you're going to do better because you knew what you should do. And similar to what Jessica was saying, I recommend that as well, especially in any interview, have about 5 good stories. And if you can get those 5 stories to answer multiple questions, so like a time where you were the superstar, you stood out and things like that, you can apply that to different things. If I ask you, oh, how tell me about a time you were on a team, you're like, great, I have a story for that. Or tell me a time that you were in a leadership position, you're like, great, I have a story for that. And it could be similar, pick and play with those stories that you have, but you want to practice and don't give up if you get rejected and things like that. It's always more time to do that. And then essentially what we already kind of said is bring yourself, bring your authentic, be authentic in these interviews. We want to hire you obviously and know what you are like. So we don't want your representative, we want you as a person. So make sure you're being authentic.
So I love that. I already jumped ahead and I already got on a soapbox earlier about some of the things I was going to talk about, but I do have my background in counseling, and I can't say enough about, being authentic and really being present with the person across from you, even if it's on a screen. I think trying to connect with someone and, making that relationship, even if you only have 10, 15, 30 minutes with someone, how can you connect with them? And so I think that, trying to make eye contact is obviously important, but also trying to make that connection. Mm-hmm. I think that is probably my biggest thing, and telling your story. So, before you meeting with that person, what are those 5 things you want to get across? How do you match that job description, and making sure that your story gets told? So you're preparing that and really practicing that. And before you get in front of that screen with them, how are you going to get that story across to them? So, really thinking that through. And beyond that, I think really trying to not get too down on yourself. I know right now, and I know this is a little bit off topic, but I know right now with COVID is a really tough time, and you're probably going to have not only maybe possibly a hard time getting an interview to start with, but maybe you do get that interview and maybe you don't get the job, and maybe that happens repetitively. And I know me, even before COVID had happened, I was face-to-face in real interviews, and I told you guys how it took me, I went through 5 interviews before I got that Skype interview and got that job. I mean, it's easy to get down on yourself. What am I doing wrong? And I can tell you, now I'm a trained professional. I was interviewing well, I was a good student, and I just wasn't the right fit. And, sometimes that happens. Sometimes you are interviewing wrong. I will say that is possible. That does happen. But sometimes you're just not the right fit for the company, or sometimes there's someone more qualified out there. So try not to get too down upon yourself, try to hang in there and just be your best version of yourself and keep going. And eventually, at some point, you will find something out there, and we will help you through that. We are on this journey for you here at Career Services, and we're here for you. So don't hesitate to reach out. We're a free service, and come meet with us.
My advice was twofold, or is twofold, but just kind of started it for me. Don't hesitate to use us. We are here to be used. You can do a practice interview with us 100 times if you want to, maybe not 100. 90 definitely. But use us if we can help you. My other piece is thank you notes are a must. Don't think you're done when you hang up with your interviewer. Write your thank you note. If you can, mail it. If you can't, at least email it. Those are the lasting touches that really stick with your interviewer. And just a reminder, as we head into the fall semester, there's going to be a ton of virtual career fairs, which also mean a ton of virtual interviews. So make sure that you take into account everything that Charrae and Jess have said today.
Awesome. That was great advice from everyone. We really appreciate the questions that came in. As I mentioned in the chat, feel free to email any other questions that maybe you're thinking about still to our Vanity account, and we will make sure those get answered. So with that being said, we appreciate all of you being here today, and we hope you take this advice when preparing for your next virtual interview after attending all our virtual career fairs coming up in the fall. And once again, this was West Virginia University Career Services with today's expert, Charrae Rogers from Sherwin Williams. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks.